Good afternoon. Here we are with another riveting interview with an eminent guest, Dr Lawrence Owens.
Hello, George.
Now, I've known Lawrence for a number of years, and he's a bioarcheologist, and more, lots more.
A varied career.
Yeah, very varied, with lots of interests that takes you to all the corners of the world, and also on lots and lots of tours here in London,
Yep.
with different aspects of Londinium. So that actually, I'd like to pick up on that because your website is key to emphasising that the Roman era really set London as a place, as a capital.
Yes, it did, yeah.
However, the capital for the Roman era was in Colchester.
That's right.
But this was really to access the West.
Pretty much. It was a trading post that kind of got slightly out of hand after a while, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And eventually it went
Yeah.
industrial, and then it
Yeah.
became genteel.
Yeah. So actually, can we just discuss very briefly that Roman era, because my understanding of our parliament today is that we have the upper house, the lower house, which is of course like the Senate at the Roman era.
Mm-hmm.
We all the gates in London are Roman gates,
They are.
and within that was the amphitheatre, which you can see today, which is below the Guildhall, which is just fantastic, isn't
It's
it?
an amazing thing. And there's a Mithraeum temple as well, and there's a number of other buildings too, and there's a remains of a forum.
Where's
and there's
that?
a basilica underneath Leadenhall Market.
I didn't know that. So
If you go to the basement of the hairdresser there is actually the remains of the gate into the basilica.
it's
right there
amazing,
in the
isn't
basement,
it?
so,
Isn't
yeah.
that just amazing?
Pretty good.
So, and of course, all our Roman roads, our calendar, our names, it all derives from that
They do.
civilization.
They do, but I mean, to a certain extent, English is mostly German. And so we got the structure is Latin and the remainder is German.
Right.
And so it's got bits and pieces which
Yeah.
have worked their way in over the years.
But the Romans were utterly ruthless. Am I right?
Yes.
And I mean, we have the famous Boudica and what happened to her daughters, which is horrendous. So when they left, of course, it all went to mayhem, didn't it?
410 AD. They couldn't sustain it any longer because it was under attack from the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
And also things at home were going badly wrong because the Romans were marrying them into their own families and generally carrying on and acting in a very decadent kind of late empire kind of way. Weren't really paying attention to far-flung bits of the empire like here. Therefore, they said, well, take care of yourselves, and just left. So as a result, the Germans thought that was brilliant. And so they came bouncing straight across here, and before you know who you are, Londinium is abandoned and London Vic begins.
Yeah. Interesting times.
I would not like to have lived then.
But how did they cope with the climate? Because it's different from the Mediterranean.
They complained a lot about
did
the
they?
climate. Oh yeah, there's letters in the British Museum which go back to Vindolanda. And complaints about the weather is one of those things, along with the absence of fish sauce, which is basically rotted fish stew.
That's right.
Which you pour. It's like the Marmite of
with-
the ancient Roman world.
But they had that with the gruel, the porridge. It was a porridge.
They had it with everything. It's called garum. But I mean, they produced it in the Mediterranean because it's hot there, and they put it. You seal it inside these ceramic vessels and bake it in the sun. It is genuinely repellent stuff. But the absence of all these sorts of fine things were a problem for the Romans. And also, of course, many of the Romans who were here weren't Romans. They were Germans, and they were would have been French or other parts of Europe because they conscripted mercenaries as they
I was
went
going
up.
to say mercenaries.
And so therefore, there are a dozen languages spoken in the Roman army here.
Right. Interesting. And that's the history here in Britain.
That's the history here.
Okay, so you're commonly known as Indiana Bones.
Indiana Bones, yeah.
Because Lawrence is master of looking at bones and using his Sherlock Holmes intuition.
Is that how you would describe it? Yeah, well, fair enough.
In layman's terms,
That's fair
because
enough,
I'm a
yeah.
layman and I'm certainly not academic, although I do have interests. And well, that's how I would. I mean, that's how I tell people how I look at things, and they say, "Oh, how do you know that?" Well, I just Sherlock Holmes,
It's a bit of knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a bit more than that. I think you have a little bit more than that. So, what you specialize in is the body preservation as well.
Yes, all ancient bodies.
Yeah. So but body preservation, if you can just describe, so it can be natural within the sand or the ice or whatever, and what most people are really, really keen on are the mummies.
Yeah, so the idea of mummies seems to have come from bodies that preserve naturally anyway, because in Egypt about 6,000 years ago, as the place dried out, the sand began to appear, bodies buried in the sand dried out by themselves. People noticed this and got it into their heads it was somehow important socially. And so therefore they began to make mummies based on the original sand-dried bodies. Although ironically, and much to the annoyance of Egyptologists, mummies of Egypt are not the oldest in the world.
Chile. Right.
Yes, indeed. Chile,
Right.
the Chinchorro.
Yeah.
They made some genuinely freaky-looking mummies in the Neolithic period, so thousands of years before this.
Amazing.
And entirely independently, of course. And so
Yeah.
therefore, no aliens were involved, no UFOs.
Yeah, this is what I picked up when I was obviously doing a little bit of research, is that all these civilizations were not connected. The geography was just too vast, and they evolved with the same pottery and techniques.
They thought them up. And so the people who came to the Americas are the case study because they came across about between 20 and 30 or possibly more thousand years ago. And so pottery and metal and writing and mummification and a bunch of other things all independently appeared in the New World and the Old World and different parts of the Old World. And so therefore you have bronze appearing in different places and pottery appearing randomly in Japan and then also the Middle East. And then it turns up randomly in Europe and it also pops up over in America again. So you can kind of understand these conspiracy theories, but they're not. It's not that difficult. It's just humans in a certain population density will come up with new ideas and they'll be seized upon if they work.
It just shows you how, as a species, we are rather special.
We're pretty unusual. I mean,
Yeah.
to an extent, animals are animals, but after a while, you can't just say, well, you know, the wildebeest would do that, so would a human. It doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Now tell me, there's a 3-month process to mummifying an Egyptian mummy.
Yes, there is.
Is it 3 months or 4 months?
It's 3 months.
3 months. So can you just describe to our listeners the process? Because when I actually looked into that, I thought, especially the brain.
Well, it's okay. First of all, a quick disclaimer. And most of what we know about this comes from Herodotus, who wrote about it in the late period of the Egyptian history. So Egyptians lasted from about 3200 BC right the way down to the 2nd century AD. But most of the highlight of what we know of their mummies is kind of maybe 2,500 to maybe 1000 BC, when the mummies were the best they ever really were. It takes a long time because first thing you have to do is stop it from decomposing. So you cut a small hole on the left-hand side just above the hip and pull out all of the intestines and all the other stuff apart from the heart and put them in 4 canopic jars with different heads on top.
Okay.
Having done that, you then get a whole load of natron and try drying out the body. Natron being a natural salt.
Like a salt.
A natural salt, a desiccant salt. And this takes a long time to do, which is why it takes so long to dry these things out. And then having done that, you have a wrinkled prune person. You don't want a wrinkled prune person because the idea of it is they look like themselves in the underworld, so you'll know who they are. They have to be named in the underworld. Say, oh, it's Bob.
Right.
If Bob looks like a prune, you won't know who he is. Therefore, you give him a facelift and you like sort of primp him a little bit and like sort of stuff his cheeks out like a hamster and put some gold lids under his eyelids, put a bone in his nose to hold his nose out, pin his ears down like this, and then the entire body has to be waxed and it has to be oiled and it has to be filled and stuffed with leaves, and packets go inside to maintain the body's shape, and you have to make sure you replace the things that are missing. So if you have a missing toe, you give you a fake toe. So the earliest prostheses in the entire world
That's a
are
bit
actually
obsessive,
Egyptian.
isn't it?
A little bit. They got it into their minds that the body perfect, or at least body intact anyway, had to go through to the underworld. If it wasn't intact, it couldn't go.
Right.
Therefore, you give the impression of entirety when there wasn't necessarily any. And then, of course, you, having done that, and you packed it with herbs, and so it's bug-proof. And
Herbs?
Herbs.
Which ones in particular?
I don't know. That's a very specialist area.
Okay, fine.
But lots of resins and so on. You make resins as
Right.
well. Resins that come from trees, conifers especially. And then you kind of like, then you then have to wrap the body up inside huge amount of bandage,
Yes.
like, half a mile, and inside it you have to put all the different sorts of things. So little amulets have to go inside it in a certain order over certain parts of the body, and then you have to put a beetle, a magic beetle, just over your heart to prevent your heart from telling tales on you in the underworld. It's called a heart scarab.
I wonder which person dreamt all of this up.
A priest who wanted some money.
Yeah, exactly.
Long story short, this all started very simply, but as they realized they could charge more money for more things, it became more and more out of hand.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why the Battle of Egypt story is basically a battle between kings and priests.
Right.
Because the priests got too powerful and that pushed one thing one way, one thing the other way, and that led to a whole load of problems and collapses and calamities in ancient Egypt.
Now, when they first started this process of mummifying the body, they took out the organs. How did they deal with the head?
Well, the head is obviously has to look like you, but they got it into their heads that the brain is made of snot. And therefore is not worthwhile. So therefore what you have to do is get a nice long corkscrew. It's sort of like a metal piece with a curve on it.
Right.
And you ram it up the left nostril here, punch it through with the ethmoid plate up here into the brain, give it a good scramble, pull it out, and the brain pulled out of your nose, and you throw it away, believing it to be kind of snot and therefore not worthwhile. Then you get a syringe of black tar, ram it up and squeeze it and fill the brain case of black tar.
Oh, really? And that would set solid?
It would. Most of these things, if you look, you can see, an X-ray, you can see the tar inside the skull.
So they made the tar from...
It's naturally occurring, and they make also it's a melange.
From trees, or
it's partly trees, partly mineral, and so forth. It's not, I say tar. It's not quite as simple as that, but it's a kind of a gloopy melange which will set hard, and so therefore to this day they still have it. Also, you paint the body, and there's a rather famous case of this. They painted the body and they rested his head against a bowl full of this stuff, and it glued itself to his head, and they couldn't get it off. And you can see the chisel marks around the outside where they tried to remove it, and they couldn't.
Man.
So they bundled him up and hoped nobody would notice, and of course, no one did until now. So they're busted.
Oh, so, that's. I was going to say that's hilarious, but
it is hilarious. It's okay. They're dead for a long time now. It's all right.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Yeah. That's and. The oldest, the most preserved body, mummified body in the world, where is that?
Oh, well, I mean, like Ötzi, the one that springs to mind. Ötzi is a Bronze Age chap from the Highlands on the edge of Italy and Switzerland. And he was found with all of his, he's a hunter-looking chap, Bronze Age guy, with his clothes and his boots and his dagger and his
and why weapons. Was he so preserved?
Ice. Fell into an ice flow.
Really?
Seems to have been shot in the back, fled up the hill, passed out from the cold, died, covered over, and...
What with an arrow shot in the back?
Yeah, they found, and they, in a brilliant bit of academia, they managed to miss the arrow lodged in his shoulder for a decade. They finally spotted it. It was a stone arrowhead, this size. It's amazing how they missed it. Poor chap. Yeah, but he's probably the best preserved, although the other one, which is also close, is Juanita. And Juanita is a Inca mummy from Peru. And she looks like she could just get up and walk away. She is so well preserved because she comes from a mountaintop.
And where is she at the moment?
She's in Peru. She's in a special museum up in the Andes.
In the Andes?
Yeah, because I mean, like they got it into their heads that God is up there. So what you have to do is take sacrifices as high as you can and leave them there. And so they did.
I'd like to go there.
You'd like the mountains.
Yes,
you'd like climbing up a mountain or two.
Yes.
But no, I mean, like most of these bodies, the bodies are perfect, as in the perfection was what they wanted. The Inca did. So no moles, no scars, whatever. And then they would generally drug them and then bury them alive in these stone cairns and then leave them there to die of exposure.
Oh, not very nice.
And then occasionally they were hit by lightning too, so really unlucky.
Tell me, when did you first become interested in the ancient world? And
I was 5 and dug a large hole in the garden looking for the Romans.
Really?
Yes.
You were that enthused?
Yes. I wasn't very bright because the Romans didn't actually make it to Scotland, so I was in Scotland at the time.
Okay.
However, it was a good intention. I did find what I was convinced with the Roman camp was in fact the remains of a bonfire, I think, from years past, so melted bottles and such.
So was this from reading books, or was one of your relatives really keen on...
My father was very keen on all things historical and archaeological, and I was ill in bed with glandular fever, and I was flicking through books on Egyptian stuff and so on.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought to myself, this is awesome. Finding old things is brilliant. And I already liked things anyway, because objects tell stories, and I always liked collecting things and shells and stones and whatever. And it just kind of tied into that effortlessly. And then, of course, I like bones, and so the archaeology and stuff and bones coalesced, and I
Right.
became an ancient bones person.
Okay, so this theme carried on through your junior school and your
I always wanted to do it.
senior school.
I refused to.
Really?
I refused to try anything I didn't like. So therefore, my grades were always either very high or very low,
Okay,
depending on what I wanted.
Okay, because only for the things that you were interested in, and then you managed to get a scholarship.
I did.
And where was that to study?
Well, I'd done my first degree in Durham, which is archaeology, and then I wanted
was it Durham?
Durham, my
I
first
know
degree.
Durham
Yeah.
very well.
Nice place. And I wanted to do my master's in Liverpool in human evolution, and Paul McCartney actually sponsored me to go, which is rather
That's
nice.
very nice of him.
It is. I mean, he and my mother knew each other, and they're born on the same day of the same year, actually, in a rather weird coincidence. And so they knew each other, and he just, I don't know, somehow heard about this idea of mine and just volunteered to pay.
Oh, well, that's very good.
It is. And so Paul, if you're watching, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
So you had this fantastic sponsorship, and you graduated. That's marvelous.
I did. Having got that one, I was then lucky to get the Natural Environment Research Council grant for my PhD as well. So I was able to. I was pretty lucky because I was the last year to go through fully funded undergraduate as well.
Yes.
And so I managed to get through, and the NERC funded my doctoral research too.
Right. And you're happiest when you're travelling and you're on a dig, is that right?
Yes.
And tell me, what's it like when you uncover something revolutionary? Yeah.
Well, very often you don't realise it's revolutionary until it happened, and therefore you're suddenly jolted out of a kind of a trance state that you go into when you're excavating, because you're constantly aware of everything around you.
Right.
But at the same time, your mind's doing many other things.
Okay.
And so therefore, in Peru, for example, there are lots of mummies and they're all packed in together. So I'm brushing away and suddenly there'll be a clonk and he'd be like, and of course it's a skull generally. Yeah. And you can see human hair appearing out of the dust and so on. And therefore you're on the case. When you first find it, when you first start doing this subject, you're driven over the edge of reason by everything you find. Eventually, after a while, it kind of calms down. Otherwise, you'd be no use to anybody. You'd be amazed at everything.
Sure.
But the good thing about it is that even then, something comes up occasionally that you think to yourself, this really gets me here. So we're working in forensic cases or cases where there's evidence of violence or a violent death or something like that. Or, of course, something glamorous like gold turns up or whatever it happens to be. Then that really does take your breath away.
Sure.
And it does, even now, after 30-odd years of doing it, it still does.
So I was also thinking that, because I was wondering why the hell was Napoleon so enwrapped with Egypt, and I was thinking in our modern times, our superpowers, that they're wrapped up with space exploration and putting the flags in everywhere on different planets, and I sort of thought, well, I'll run this by you. In the 19th century and whatever, they saw that these kingdoms, these ancient civilizations, as a way of putting the French flag on Egypt and beating the English to it.
Well, Napoleon would conquer anything, frankly. If he could get away with it, he'd have conquered anything. Egypt looks good because it's the ancestor of the things that the Greeks, that the French and the English and everybody else believes are their ancestors culturally. So the Romans and the Greeks couldn't exist without the Egyptians. The Egyptians are the kind of the center of all these, those days, very mystic and mysterious kind of way of looking at the world. And of course, if you're biblically orientated, the Bible is kind of references Egypt. And also everyone thought that things like hieroglyphs would somehow contain the answer to, I don't know, some great truth about religion or whatever. And therefore, many reasons to want to go there.
And of course, it was a Frenchman, Pierre Bouchard, who deciphered.
Well, yes, and there was Champollion as well.
Oh, Champollion.
Champollion.
Yes.
Yeah, Champollion.
Yes.
And much to the annoyance of our guy who was called Young. He tried to do it, didn't quite get his head around it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, originally there was something mystical about it, and also he was a dictator. I mean, Ramses the Great is a really good person to head for if you're a dictator.
Right.
So
was that the second? Ramses
the second, yeah. He's Pharaoh in the Bible too, if you're looking at the Bible.
And he had over 100 children?
Between 120 and 280. No one's really quite sure, but it's quite a few.
Many of that? Oh my God.
Well, yeah, he had...
Poor ladies.
Yeah, well, yeah, there were quite a few of them. To be fair, it wasn't just one or two. Otherwise, they would have been very tired. But yes, many wives and concubines.
Fascinating. And what's your next big dig?
Well, my big dig at the moment is the one I've been working on for the last few years. It's in northern Egypt, and it's called Kafr Hassan Daoud, and KHD for short, for obvious reasons. And it's a site which predates the pyramids by about 1,000 years. And so it's right at the very beginning of civilization of any sort, of any place in the world, really. And so therefore, first villages, first industry, even remotely, the first in the unification of northern and southern Egypt into one country, which it wasn't before, and the beginning of industrial levels of agriculture and that kind of thing. And the first named king who makes any sense, who's called Nama, who's the unifier of these two lands. And that site falls right on that period. So therefore, so theoretically, you're looking at people who are around as the first writing is being written down. You know, it's a fairly impressive thing, first name people. These people could possibly have seen Nama, who is the first proper king of Egypt, this sort of thing. And so we really have dozens of questions, and we're trying to get the answers out of these bones, which we're recovering there.
Have you been to the new museum in Alexandria?
Alexandria, no. Cairo, yes.
But it's moved.
The Cairo.
So, sorry, yes, but in Giza.
Giza, yeah. Yes, I have.
What's your impression?
It's very imposing. If you don't know what you're looking at, though, you might find it rather hard to navigate because it's designed with drama in mind. It certainly has that. The military, of course, government has been in charge of designing it, and it has that very imposing kind of look to it. And it has infinity pools, and it's got Ramses the Great standing beside it, and it's got all the staircase of pharaohs, and it all looks very grand.
I can't wait to see it.
Then you get to the upstairs galleries. You have the same theme of objects scattered across a floor, which are from different periods, or things which are very different from the same period scattered across those floors, and it's not always immediately obvious what you're looking at. So I would probably look into what the history of Egypt a little bit before you go, just so you can get a handle on what you're looking at.
Okay. And what will happen to the old museum building?
Because no one seems to know.
It's a lovely building, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and when I was last there, they still had some of the objects there.
Okay.
But I think they will eventually move them all. But maybe what happens,
might be a hotel.
It could be a hotel, given that the military is the military, and they might turn it into some kind of rather grand reception place for military maneuvers and receptions or something like that. I've heard various suggestions, but I don't know what they're going to do with it, actually.
Well, it's lovely speaking with you today, Lawrence.
And to speak to you.
It's fascinating. It's a bit like the universe. It's a never-ending interest, really, in Egypt. And although I suppose with the dead, they're dead.
The dead are everywhere, and they're coming to get you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.